people are presenting, or when Rav Nachum or Rav Landis are presenting, they ask for people to read, and I admit I never volunteer, but I'm going to be on the flip side of that today, and I am going to be asking for volunteers. And I'm going to teach this the way I like teaching in schools. I've done this before in our venue with a slideshow. Those who saw it a couple of years ago or last year when I did it, this time I did not add the cute pictures to the slideshow like I do with the grade school students. But still have a chock full of information, so that should be good. I'm going to start with the tour. We can break down the tour basically into 3 parts, actually 2.5 parts. It's sort of 2 main parts with a parenthetical bit in the middle. I'm going to ask if somebody would like to volunteer to read like I never volunteer. Anyone? Yes, Josh Bueller. Go ahead.
Was it Josh or wait?
Well, I was going to say, because as I was saying anyone, I was about to say Bueller, but then you raised your hand, so I had to sort of mesh the 2. Sorry, Joel. I meant Joel.
I was wondering.
Joel, yeah.
And Josh is here now.
You have to realize I just turned 57, so you have to listen to what I mean, not to what I say. It saves a lot of time for everyone.
Fair enough. All right.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to, we'll start with the tour.
All right. Kadsha befot mishavei pruta v'shilach la achar kach sivlonot. Right. So he does kiddushin with less than shavei pruta, but then he sends some sort of gifts afterwards. All right. Lo chashinan shema shalach la l'shem kiddushin v'afilu safek kiddushin lo have. So we're not thinking that that's like to make up for kiddushin, shall we say, like that he sent it like, okay, we didn't do it right the first time, we're doing it right the second time by sending these gifts, and not even safek kiddushin. All right.
Which actually makes it ironic that the way you've translated the first part of it. How did you translate the first part? Kitcha v'pachot mishvei pruta?
You're right. He attempted to do kiddushin.
Right. I'm not saying you mistranslated. You translated obviously correctly, but it makes it a very ironic kind of a halacha.
I think for all of these, you'd have to translate it as like he went through the motions of kiddushin with less than shavei pruta, or something like that.
Right. So. Okay. That's a good.
All right. V'chatav harama, Rab Avalafia, v'davka de kaddish bekaspa aval. All right, that's only if we're doing kiddushin with kesef. Aval kaddish b'midi achrina. All right, de akir v'zila. All right, so that's in other words, but actual kesef, like a coin or a dollar bill or whatever it may be that has an actual set value he's talking about here. But if you do it with something else that goes up and down in value. All right. Afilu imbo shavei pruta chayshin and shemei shavei pruta b'madai. Right. We have this whole concern that's been through this entire siman, right? That if you do it befachot with shavei pruta, that maybe in madai for various reasons we've talked about, it might be worse shavei pruta, and therefore there's safek kiddushin or gzeira of kiddushin. And so the first part must be a case where you did it with something that doesn't have those conditions on it. So it must be like a fixed piece of currency.
Right. Yeah. Even just a piece of silver, which you can weigh.
Yeah, but silver also potentially goes up and down too. So I don't know if
modern markets, yes. I don't know how much it did then.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know. It could be. I just don't.
Yeah, it's something like I will admit my whole thing through this entire siman of not knowing enough about ancient currencies and how they worked and how they were set to know those distinctions. So, but ancient, probably before the 1970s in the U.S. when everything was backed by gold, right?
Right.
So, aval im kitcha befachot mishavei pruta is part two in the Torah as you've labeled it. Aval im kitcha befachot mishavei pruta ve'achar kach ba'alei stam bifnei edim tzricha get shevadai ba'al l'shem kiddushin. But okay, so now they do kiddushin with less than shavei pruta. To do kiddushin with less than shavei pruta, and then the two of them have sex. 2 edim, probably edim of yichud, right? Bia, right? And then that you need to get for sure, because for sure what we say here, even though we talked about this discussion before, is just stam bi'ilaf l'shem kiddushin or not. This is for sure done for the purpose. We assume that this is done for the purpose of kiddushin.
Right. Which we're going to get to that actually also in a minute. There's something very strange about that, but
yeah, Rav Landis.
How did you translate?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Rav Landis.
Yeah,
let's
okay.
say it one more time.
I gotta work on this. How did you translate stam?
You're right. I didn't. Yeah, in other words, he didn't make any obvious statement either to the ADM or to anybody else about why
Right,
he
made
was
no
doing Be'ila.
statement. Okay.
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
I think we saw Stam
Okay.
earlier in the earlier halachot when it said without conditions.
Mhm.
Or actually, no, I didn't see it in the halachot. I saw it in the Gemara right before the main source of what I was using for here. It was talking about biat stam or kiddushin stam, which is kiddushin with no conditions as opposed to with conditions. Okay.
Yeah, it is almost though as if I think part of what that is almost just that initial statement of Harat Mekudesh at Libet, I don't know, but Tabadzo, right? It's a ring that goes that's less than Shave Pruta. That like maps onto the Bia that's going to happen later to some extent.
Right. That's actually a question. I was discussing this with Rav Nachum today, and I was going to bring it up at the end of my 15-20 minutes. I'm wondering if this sort of makes that whole question of Shavet Pruta kind of irrelevant.
Oh, because
if let's even say the ring is not Shavet Pruta, and we can talk about this at the end or not, but if it's not Shavet Pruta in today's world, which is obviously a very different reality of Erusin Kiddushin than what was at the time of the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, but in today's reality, we're under the chuppah. You give the ring. The Rav says, he asks, "Hey, does this Shavet Pruta or no?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I'd pay 3 prutot for that. It's a gorgeous ring. It's fantastic." But even if it's not, they're going right to the Yichud room anyway with a din.
Yeah,
So,
I do. Yeah, unless what part of the whole thing we're dealing with here is a case where number one that you're dealing with a case where Nisuin happens right after Kiddushin, which I think by their time it really was, but it's not necessarily true. I don't know. Do we have a timeline for when that happened?
I'm not that I'm aware. I don't know. My sense is at least from this, certainly from this seif, if not from the whole Siman, is that it really is rooting itself in the reality of the time of the Gemara, when there was that 1 year period.
Yeah, and then we do really have these real concerns, right? Of during that 1 year, somebody else can come along and do Kiddushin, and
right.
So
my understanding of the Siman was that they needed to make that last statement because of the first statement, right? The first statement of the Siman was that he gave her, like, you attempted to Kiddushin Pachad Mishar Pruta, and then afterwards he gave her something that might be valuable. And I think it's the same case in the last part of the Siman, where it's like he attempted to do Kiddushin with Pachad Mishar Pruta. We might have thought that Bia doesn't work in this case because of the first part. However, they come in and bring in like a Chiddush that it works because obviously it was L'Shem Kiddushin.
yeah.
But what does it change really? Because even if Pachot Mishaveh Pruta, she's Safek Mekudeshet and needs a get. So why would Bia change anything? Here it says she needs a get.
Well, because I think it just changes things. Is that now she's actually it's Kiddushin Gemorim, right?
But because in the first one, the first one it says it's not even Safek. Not Safek Tushin. She doesn't need get. It's not Safek Tushin.
But we said earlier in the Siman.
Because this is actual. But we don't say that by actual money.
Right, but first of all, here the first part of this actually is not necessarily talking about actual money. The first part of this though is saying now we're not in a case where it's a safek. Now we know, now we have our reality that we're opening up with, the scenario we're opening up is it's not Shavet Pruta. Right?
Right.
We're not talking about maybe it is somewhere else. Uvda, it isn't. That's our given.
Right.
So then where do we go from there? Where we go from there is even if he comes and gives to brings to the gifts afterwards. Here, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to look at the first part. The setting is the man is betrothed or attempted to betroth the woman with something worth less than a pruta. The problem is that we know from the Mishnah Gemara and the Mishnah Torah from the very beginning of Siman, right? So that's a very simple, after he gives us this almost worthless item, he sends her gifts that together with the Pachot Mishte Pruta will now bring his total to more than a Pruta. And so what we would have thought, naturally have thought, okay, now he's given her more than a Pruta. But the Gemara says absolutely not, and the halacha is also saying absolutely not. And so, what's the reason? It's not kiddushin. It's not even seif kiddushin, because we're not assuming that the gifts he sent were for the express purpose of kiddushin. What we're assuming, and here's where I think I found what was going on both in the Gemara and throughout this seif. The theme of what's going on here is of what the person is not aware of, what the guy's not aware of. The assumption here is that he didn't know that what he gave her was worth less than a pruta, which means he assumes that the kiddushin have taken. So in that case, he's the civil note that he's going to send, the gifts he's going to send are not l'shem kiddushin. It could be l'shem erusin. It could be, and there's actually later on in the Even HaEzer, I think it was in Mem Hey, it talks about how it's very common in many places after the kiddushin for him to send sivlonot. And then there's a problem. What if she gets sivlonot from somebody else and she's already mikudesh to another guy? So the assumption that we're working on here is that he was under the misimpression he's engaged, and now he's sending sivlonot. He's not sending the sivlonot l'shem kiddushin. He didn't give her a pachot mishve pruta and say, this is bitnai that I'm going to give you more things next week, next month after I get my paycheck, and then it'll be the shve pruta I've given you to l'kadesh otach. And the source, actually, the Mishnah in Kiddushin, it's actually interesting. The halachot. Sorry, I saw your hand up for a second. Did you want to ask?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it has to be that he doesn't know that he is, that he's confused about what the value was, or is he confused about what he's done. It just can be that there's some other reason that he's giving her gifts, whereas with Bia, there's no other possible reason he would be doing that, because we have a general principle that people don't. Right.
There's definitely another reason to do Bia. The same pruvu.
So we've
already had a legal principle that says we assume, right? It seems like the question in the Siman is like, is his first attempt to do kiddushin with the thing that's not shavei pruta sufficient to kind of basically mean that they're oskim b'oto inyan, so that when he sends the gifts later, that is effectively kind of already under the umbrella of the previous thing. And similarly, if he goes and has sex with her after he's done this like pseudo kiddushin with less than shavei pruta, is the kind of original umbrella of what he said enough to kind of put it in the realm of l'shem kiddushin. The idea is like, well, for the gift giving thing, there are lots of other reasons he might be doing that. But for Bia, we have a general principle. We assume that he's doing it l'shem kiddushin.
How do you explain the language in the Mishnah of shemichamat kiddushin rishonim shalach?
Good. That's exactly it. This is why both the Gemara and the Torah are saying we're assuming that he's not giving the gifts, because what happens in the Mishnah? And this is on kiddushin nun between Aleph and Bet, and it's actually very interesting, by the way. The Gemara is repeated almost word for word in Kiddushin Nun and in Ketubot Ayin Gimel. And they even ask, we've already discussed this in Ketubot, why are we discussing it here? And the answer was because, well, there it was because this is relevant in terms of the Ketubah. Here we're talking about how it's relevant in terms of the Kiddushin. So even though it's the exact same deen, the exact same halacha, they bring it in two different places, say it's relevant in two different venues. So what does the Mishnah say? I'll tell you, Ruben, you want to read the Mishnah for us? And since it's short, the Rashi after?
Sure thing. I'll try my best. I'll give it a shot. So, המקדש את הנשים בשווה פרוטה, או אישה אחת בפחות משווה פרוטה, אף על פי ששלח סבלונות לאחר מכן, אינה מקודשת. Why? שמחמת קידושים הראשונים שלח, וכן קטן שקידש. So the Mishnah is saying that if someone attempts to maybe be mekadesh two women with shavei pruta, or one woman with less than shavei pruta, even though he sends them presents afterwards, they're not mekudeshet. Why? Because he sends them mechamat kiddushim harishonim, because of the first kiddushin. So I mean, my understanding is that if there wasn't Kiddushim Arishonim, it wouldn't have said Sivlonot. Right, so it's not an attempt to add to the first, to the Pachad Mishav and Pruta. It's just like a continuation of what he thought was a valid Kiddushin.
Right. And then the Rashi.
אינה מקודשת, ולא אמרינן יודע היא שאין קידושים.
Not he. אמרינן יודע היה שאין קידושין.
יודע היה שאין קידושים.
This entire seif is just talking about the man and the man's perspective. The woman is a prop, basically.
So ולא אמרינן יודע היא שאין קידושים, וגמר ושלח סבלונה לשם קידושין, אלא אמרינן מחמת קידושים הראשונים שלח. So we're not saying that he attempts to to supplement the first money that he sent. Rather, he thought that he had a valid kiddushim and is just saying presents for the heck of it, or right. I don't know, to create shalom.
How would you translate machmat?
Because of mechamat.
Yeah, right, because of. So in other words, he believes that there were already kiddushin.
Right.
And to celebrate the fact that he already did kiddushin, he's sending her these presents. So therefore, he himself believes that there was a kiddushin.
Right. So I guess in a case where.
But Nachum, you are saying that he's not doing it to supplement; he's doing it as a normal minhag, the normal minhag of sending a gift because there was kiddushin.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And I think if it were in order to supplement, when he gave her the pachot mishveh pruta, he would have said, "This is b'tnai that I'm going to be adding to this because I'm aware of how little this is worth." And the fact that that was never said, that tells us he's, in his mind, he's now engaged. So he's now sending gifts, and they're saying, well, the gifts aren't part of the Kiddushin. The gifts are just part of it's celebrating that you are Mekudash, or you think you are.
So yes. The basic assumption is that he's sending her gift, not as a supplement, but rather as a gift, because he thinks that he's married.
Yeah, it's to his wife. He thinks he's giving a nice present. It was probably a minhag to give sivlonot to your wife after you married her.
Then Siman Memhei actually talks about the minhag that was exactly that. So I'm sorry, Josh, you wanted to? I mean, Joel, I'd do that again.
No, I'd love to be Josh. Josh is great, it's confusing. I think if I remember correctly, the Beit Yosef kind of hedges a little bit on this, but in that case, the bia though, why can't we just say the same thing? That's what Mary the same way that okay. You send sivlonot to your wife. You also, that's what you do after you get married.
So that's exactly why I didn't necessarily agree with what Sarah was saying about bia. Bia is not l'shem kiddushin. If he's assuming he's already mikudash, if he's assuming that the kiddushin are already shirim and kayamim, when he does bia, it's l'shem pru urvu.
Well, I want to try first. Can I try first?
Go ahead.
And then no, I think that there might be an assumption by people. This is like maybe actually like that really the fundamental thing you do in marriage to create a marriage is bia, and all this other stuff is like a nice additional thing. It's almost like the Rambam coming back of like this is all derabanan, right? And like the real fundamental thing. So when people, whether or not that's true, it's almost irrelevant, right? Is like people believe that it's the bia that they're having on the wedding night is really what's actually affecting kiddushin. So in their minds, they're like, yeah, I did kiddushin with this thing, but come on, this is really how I'm like creating the marriage at this point, And so that it's like versus like people sending gifts is not like that. So
I'm wondering if that might be influenced by sort of the modern way of seeing marriage. Like, what do we call, like, we say, oh, they got married, but they didn't consummate the marriage. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if that isn't maybe a much later attitude that's come in, this idea of the consummating it.
I think it's really early, isn't it?
Super early.
Yeah. I mean, the Rambam seems to think that's the original kind of case of marriage, right? It's like before Matan Torah.
Right,
but that's when it was expressly.
I think it's a Christian idea that there are two things: the idea that there's kiddushin, and then there's the consummation of the marriage. There's that. I don't know if it's well. I have actually wanted to say something. Wait, but Asher, do you have an answer to that? Do you have your own answer for why the sivlonot? All right, so here's my insight that I had, which is, Mel, you can tell me or not, tell me you agree or not. The normal custom in the times of the Talmud was to do the kiddushin and then the chuppah a year later. She would go back to her husband's house, to her father's house, and not live with the man. That was the custom. And in that period of a year, he would send sivlonot as a normal thing. And the halacha is coming, it's not in this what you've brought to us in the source, but in the tour, he's saying that if he did something unusual that nobody does, which is in that first year immediately go and consummate the marriage, then he must have been doing it because he understood that he hadn't yet married with this pruta, with this half pruta, because it's not a normal thing to do. Normal thing to do is to wait a year. But if he went immediately and had bia with her, so then it's clear that he's doing it for the purpose of marriage.
I would just add to what you're saying. I mean,
I don't know if it's the immediate. I don't see it being immediately after.
But there is a specific case here. It does it bifnei edim, right? So if he's already married, no one will do it bifnei edim, right? So here in this case, he does something unusual.
Ah, nice point.
Right? Just to add to what you're saying. In this case, he actually goes out of his way. It does it bifnei edim. So obviously he's doing it l'shem kiddushin, otherwise not.
If he got two people to stand out, to make sure he was doing yichud, then it's clear that he's trying to do this for the purpose of marriage and not just puravu.
When you say marriage, are you saying nesuin, or what are you saying? We say
no kiddushin.
We say the word marriage.
In this case, I meant kiddushin.
You already had kiddushin.
No, it was half a pruta.
Ah, kiddushin. Look, this whole when we say what's the normal thing to do, the normal thing to do is if you think you're married, is to have consummation.
No, not in those days. In those days,
no, but but the halacha fell apart. I'm just saying that's the stress. That was the stress on the halacha. That was very hard for people to wait. It didn't make sense for them to wait. That's basically what happened.
Well, because of problems that ensued in that year, we got rid of it. But I think the Gemara is talking at a time when it existed.
And you were correct before when you said the sivlo notes were part of. What does sivlo note mean? What does it literally mean? You make life bearable. It's a vow. So here he gives her a ring. They're separated for the year. All right, so now he sends gifts, kind of keeps things going. And that's what sivlo notes is, so you can kind of get through it, as opposed to just being apart.
By that definition, she should also be sending to him.
It was a stressful deal that couldn't last. And therefore, that's why we don't have sivlo note right now. There may have been an after effect that even after when Kiddushin and the suing came together, I'm sending a sivlo note, but I don't think so. Sivlo notes seem to have fallen out for the reason you said, Reb Nachum.
Okay, let's go on to the. If anything else, I want to go into the parenthetical bit where he quotes Rav Abulafia. Sarah, you want to read? Sure. And even if you don't want to, will you be willing to?
Yeah. Okay. וכתב הרמה, דווקא דקידש בכספה, אבל קידש במידי אחרינה, דיקריה וזילה, אפילו אין בו שווה פרוטה, חיישינן שמה שווה פרוטה במדע. So the Rama is going to say that this only applies if he did the kiddushin with actual money, but if he did it with some other thing, then that changes it, whose value fluctuates. Then even if it wasn't worth shavei pruta, we're concerned that it might be worth shavei pruta somewhere else, and so then we're back in the world of saying that is safek kiddushin.
Right now, on one hand, this actually seems to me, at least, almost counterintuitive. When I first read it, before I looked at the Drisha who was quoting the Beit Yosef, it seems to be saying that this is only true when we're actually talking about money, right? With money, then we know, then it's how could it be that if he gave money that he doesn't know that it's not actual kiddushin? If it was an actual, you can say, okay, he didn't know what it was worth, and nobody was able to value it for him to tell him it was not worth a pruta. And he thought that this sheaf of wheat was worth a pruta and a half, and it turns out that the price had plummeted that day, and so it was actually worth 3/4 of a pruta, and who knew? But with an actual coin, with an actual piece of silver, you would know. So the Dresha follows the Beit Yosef, says, Din ze pashut ve'eno shayach lishluach sivlanot, which means what this really is saying is that when the man does the kiddushin with actual money instead of an object, then the whole shiluach sivlanot isn't really something that we're looking at. It's not something that it's not relevant to this whole case. Like the relevance of the sivlanot is only when he's actually giving an item and not money.
Sorry, so you mean it's not considered sivlonot and it's considered like a top up of the money, or like?
I'm saying that when he is actually giving money, we're going to assume at this point, and this actually we're going to get into there's going to be sort of a machloket on this a little bit later. At this point, at this stage, we're assuming that he knows that he gave less than a pruta.
Right. So then we could assume that
then we could assume that the sivlonot it's understood to be a condition to be part of the kiddushin, because I know this is worth less. Now, the only time that wouldn't be the case, we're going to talk about this afterwards, is the question comes up: Did he actually know that it has to be worth a pruta? You know, because a lot of what's going on throughout this seif and throughout all of the Gemara that it's coming out of is a question of how much does he know, where is he, how knowledgeable is he, and how kind of in the dark is he? So yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I just wonder whether there's a simpler explanation here, which is just like, not that the sort of general concern, like it in other words, the simple explanation seems like, well, if he gave her something that is worth less than Shavei Pruta, but it's an object, we already know from sort of a different area that's enough to result in kiddushin. So we don't even have to look to this other thing that happened, right? You don't have to go sort of like fishing for another place where kiddushin might have occurred, because we already know it did, or we already sort of hold the chumrah that it did. And so then like any potential problem or potential kiddushin that might have happened with the gift giving is kind of not relevant because he's already married to her.
Somebody else isn't muted, I think. Okay, okay, wait. I got lost right there for a second. I think you're right. However, again, it seems to me that the Torah is opening with a situation we're not talking about it could be worth more than a pruta somewhere else. We have now the given. The item he gave is not worth a pruta. It's sort of like I remember in 9th grade geometry class where you have the givens, and then you have to work from those givens. And so this is the given of the tour.
It
Whatever
seems like
he
at
gave
least the
wasn't worth it.
reads it as explains it that way, right? He says, "Pashutu dechayshinan shema shavei pruta b'madai uchadesh Shmuel k'moshe nitba'er b'siman zeh." Then the Bedek Abayit comes back and says, like, wait a minute, what if actually half of pruta could be, could still be shavei pruta somewhere else because like currency changes, whatever.
Right.
That's how he. I
don't know how much currency was changing then, though. I know now it does. I used to work in finance, and I deal with money changes all around the world, but.
The Ramah, you might have thought the Ramah is saying that when you give an actual chefetz, an actual object, then if he gave sivlonot, then it's a safek kiddushin. And he's not saying that. He's saying when you gave an actual object, then it's a safek kiddushin, period. Whether or not he gave sivlonot, because once it's an object, so it has a varying value, and maybe in Madai it's worth. So he's just telling you how to read what the Ramah is saying. He's not coming to say specifically that the sivlonot does work when you give an object. No, he's just saying when you give an object, it always have a suffix.
Yeah.
I think what happens, the Gemara has lots, it has like lots of places where they talk about the issue of being less than Shvei Pruta. And so those, and in like different ways, and those are brought in different seifim, but because back in like the early seifim, we made this decision that we're going with this opinion from one Gemara that in fact, we're always going to be Safek Kiddushin, then that sort of gets like tacked on to each of the other cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things go ahead.
I mean, I think the Drisha points out here, though, that the problem in particular in this Gemara is, right, is the Lashon, or it's actually the Mishnah, right, which is lo chashinan, right, makes it sound like there's no worry at all in the world, right? That's like even Shmuel's thing about Safek, Shavei Pruta B'Madai is like out, and that's why the Ramah, the Beit Yosef doesn't seem to think this, but why the Ramah has to come in and say like, yeah, this has to be only with money and not with an object that's like money. Because the Lashon, even though Yavni, I think you're right. I think the Lashon of the Gemara here in particular is incredibly, and the Mishnah here rather, is incredibly difficult to deal with otherwise. So I think it's what the Drisha is saying, at least that's how I understood it. So
It's fair. What did you want to say?
Yeah, just to respond to Joel quickly, I think like part of what's going on here is the fact that for some reason that I don't fully understand, we've like taken this Memra of Shmuel's, which in the Gemara on its own does not seem to be like globally dispositive for everything, and made it and kind of elevated it to this rule that applies in every case. And now all of a sudden it's like it causes problems because it's not clear that like in Chazal it was supposed to apply so broadly, and now it has to. And so then we end up with things like this where like the Rama has to come and like kind of patch things over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right. Since I don't want to go too much, I've already gone over the time I promised. We still have a bit to go. Let's go to the last part. Yavni, you want to read the last part of the tour?
אבל אם קידשה בפחות משווה פרוטה ואחר כך באה עליה סדם בפני עדים, צריכה גט שוודאי בעל לשם קידושין.
Okay, good. Now the setting of the problem is the same as the beginning of the seif. He's betrothed or attempted to betroth the woman something worth less than a pruta. And we already know the problem is but the new situation is then he goes and he has relations with the woman, with the witnesses, in order to consummate the kiddushin. So the new answer now, unlike what we had before, now it is kiddushin. And she wants to marry another, has to have a get. And the rationale is, and this is also throughout, we see in several places, obviously, if he's having relations with her, and this was in the Gemara, especially in the Ketubot part, in the section of Ketubot that was dealing with the exact same thing that the section of Kiddushin was. It said the reason that we assume this is because of course, if he's going to sleep with her, he's not just sleeping with her just because he wants to have sex. He's sleeping with her for the purpose of Kiddushin. And this is where we get to the question earlier, and where we had already our own machloket within the class. If we're saying that he believed mistaken that Kiddushin was valid, right? We said he believed that. If he believed the Kiddushin was valid, then the question is, would the biyah have been for would it be l'shem Kiddushin, or would it have been for the purpose of pruvu? If he's thinking that by giving her what he gave her, thinking it was worth more than a pruta, she's already mikudeshet. Then when he has biyah, it's not l'shem Kiddushin at that point, it's l'shem pruvu. So the Darchei Moshe, and this is also a little hard to understand, but I found it interesting. The main point, the whole thing is actually very interesting, but I'm going to, he says, and I think he's quoting here, it says, Shvot Maimon. If I'm not mistaken, that's Maharam Rothenberg, yes? Shvot Maimon. I was looking for this, I could not find it. But I was trying to find the source, trying to find it inside, I was not able to. But from the best I could gather is Shuvot Maimon is the shutim of the Maharam of Rothenberg, who says, Hadam Rinan de Boel L'Shem Kiddushin Davka Sheyodea Shekiddushin Rishonim lav klum havu upata'ut hayu. So he's saying, what are we talking? We're talking about it is a shame kiddushin that he's coming because he's since learned what he didn't know obviously at the beginning, that the first kiddushin were not really kiddushin. He thought they were kiddushin. Turns out that was a ta'ut. They weren't kiddushin. So now he's saying, okay, let's make this right. We'll do the biyah, and the biyah will be l'shem kiddushin. We could go on a lot on this. Again, I know I've already taken up more time than I told Rav Nachum I would, and I still haven't even touched the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, the other Ramah with the Aleph. But are there questions, comments, thoughts before I fly through?
I mean, the fact that he has Edom here, like in this case, kind of like reflects the fact that he knows that his first Kiddushim are not Kiddushim, right? Because if he thought that they were Kiddushim, why would he need Edom?
Well, in that case, I could ask the same question. Why do we need Edim? Why do we need Shomrim at the Chedi Yichud now?
I mean, that's a newer thing, right?
But it's this is its source. This is where it comes from. But anyway,
that's a valid question. Actually,
it falls in the same category as the question I also asked about why do we need the Edim of the Shaveh Pruta of the ring if we're going to have Bia right now with witnesses. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to ask Josh. This time I actually mean Josh.
אוקיי. קידשה בכסף פחות משווה פרוטה, אף על פי ששלח לה סבלונות. אחר כך אין חוששים ששלח אותן סבלונות לשם קידושין.
Now, actually, I'm going to stop here. What's the major difference? That's almost word for word what the Torah said, except for one very, very significant difference.
Doesn't say that that's not kiddushin.
It also does say it says lo ein chosheshin. We're still in the same situation, but there is one. The one difference is here. Up until now, the entire Siman has been talking about lekadesh be pachot shveh pruta. Here, he's actually going along with what the Ramah wrote. What the Ramah was quoted in the Torah. He's actually speaking about kesef. He's specifically not talking about an item whose value might be known, might not be known, might change, might be worth something somewhere else. He's specifically and exclusively talking about kesef. And I think that's the real chiddush, I think, of the Mechaber here. Sorry, Josh, so keep going with the second part.
Can I ask you, is this your punctuation, Asher?
This is from the Ala Torah. Ala Torah website.
They have a period. They have a period after.
Yeah, I believe they did. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't like
I hate punctuation.
I don't think it's right.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. They're great Talmidei Chachamim. They're not editors. So.
Okay.
So I'll read the next one without punctuation. אבל אם קידשה בפרוטה ואחר כך בא עליה שם בפני עדים גט שדאי בעל בשם קידושין.
Go ahead and add the Ramah because it's all connected within the same theme, even though it doesn't really seem it at first.
הוא עדין קטן שקידש ונתקרב אצלה, צריכה גט, בוודאי בעל כשהגדיל לשם קידושין. ודווקא בחיי גוונה, שכל אדם יודע דאין קידושי קטן או בפחות מפרוטה כלום, ולכן בעל לשם קידושין. אבל במקום דאיתא למיתאי, צריך קידושין אחרים, כמו שנתבאר בסימן זה.
Translate.
So other
or even paraphrase is good.
Just other cases where it's obvious that there was no kiddushin in the first place. So a katan who did kiddushin and then grows up with her, and I guess when he's older, does bia. Then it's just we assume that bia was done l'shem kiddushin because everyone knows that pachot mishveh pruta or kiddushay katan don't create kiddushin. But if there could be a mistake, if there could be another understanding, then there has to be another kiddushin because we don't assume that about the bia.
Okay. Okay, so we'll start with I actually want to start with the Ramah because it sort of seemed out of left field at first, the child. But the source of the ruling is actually the same. The Mishnah that we read earlier, so we're saying that this, so the Mishnah is already putting the two of these together. And there's also a thematic connection. The Ramah writes, the Ramah actually puts them together when he says, Adam yodeh she'en kiddushay katan or pachot bipruta klum. So, yeah, they are sort of automatically connected. The Ramah is basing the ruling on I think the way the rest is seen. This is what I was thinking earlier, and I know not everybody agrees with this. I think a lot of it's based on what he knows, what he doesn't know. Right? A child's not able to perform kiddushin, and kiddushin cannot be performed on the child's behalf. So as long as they're both the boy and the girl are children, even if they're living in the same house, nothing they do can be considered kiddushin. As soon as they're no longer ketinin, assuming now that they have grown up and reached the age where they understand what kiddushin is and they understand what married couples do, it's going to be assumed that because they were, even if they thought they were mekudoshim, even though halachically they weren't, they thought they were, because that's sort of the basis, says katan shekidesh. They're going to have relations now, and here the bia is going to be. I see Rav Nachum shaking his head. So okay, good.
I'm sorry to disturb you. I thought the idea is that they dafka do know that kiddushin is not kiddushin, and whenever they are an adult, now they'll do one single act of the bia for the purpose of kiddushin.
Right. You're right. That's actually what I'd been thinking earlier, and right now I was talking off the top of my head and saying something that I had not been thinking. They're going to understand now, and this actually, I even wrote it here. They know that the relations they will have are l'shem kiddushin specifically, and it's actually consistent with what the Darchei Moshe wrote on the Torah earlier when he said the boy l'shem kiddushin davka sheyodea kiddushin rishonim lav klum avu. Right, even though it says katan shekidesh, he knows that wasn't really a kosher kiddushin, and so now this is the case where we have, and the Ramah then adds if you're in a place or a situation where there could be some misunderstanding, be on the safe side, do another kiddushin that nobody can call into question, nobody can wonder, nobody can. And then the Mechaber focuses on two situations, one of which we know. The first one is actually what I found the confusing one, right? So now we're saying what we had said earlier, what we read with the Torah, that if he gave when the Torah wrote, he gave something that's worth less than a pruta, but our understanding then, or at least my understanding then, was that he didn't know it was worth less than a pruta. Mm-hmm. And so he gave the sivlonot, not l'shem kiddushin, but because he's giving the sivlonot, like we talked about. But if it was actual bekesef, it seems more unlikely, because like I said earlier, with actual kesef, it's harder for me to imagine that he doesn't know that it's worth less than a pruta. Because the seif is focusing on the betrothals made with a certain ignorance, or ignorance actually has a much more negative connotation. I say a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. For example, the man who doesn't know the value of what he gives the woman, the child. It stands to reason here that there's also a lack of understanding. But the only thing that I could think of that would make sense here is that in this case, what the Mechaber is saying is that the man doesn't know that the betrothal has to be shvepruta. Obviously, now, if that's the case, if that's what the Mechaber is saying, the Ramah would disagree with that. The Ramah says everybody knows. But maybe it's possible the Mechaber thinks not everybody knows that. Do they have anything else? And the second scenario is very much like what we saw on the tour. It's the same scenario, the same difficulties, the same solutions. And then the question that I mentioned earlier that I discussed briefly with Rav Nachum today, if the ring is worth less than a pruta, and he can still kiddush derech biyah, then today, now that the whole way the kiddushin and nisuim are done very differently than they were 500 and 2,000 years ago, why do we need the witness under the chuppah to look at a ring and say it's shevet pruta? If we know right after the chuppah they're going to the cheder yichud anyway, and they're going to be witnesses that they're there, two shomrim that are witnesses that there is yichud. And so I'm wondering if the ring actually still serves a practical purpose. Is it a symbolic reminder of how things once were, or is it completely superfluous? And I honestly, I don't have an answer for this, but I would love to hear if anybody does have.
I mean, I think that the main type of kiddushin is with that ring, actually. And in fact, the brachot that we say, and the Sheva brachot especially, are after the kiddushin. So, or even after in other words, or after the chuppah. So we can't say, oh no, nothing happened yet. We're waiting until the cheder yichud. Then why did we say these brachas already? No, the real event is the giving of the ring. The cheder yichud is a chumrah. It's not that's the ikar. Don't turn the extra part into the ikar. That's not the ikar.
Yeah, I want to add to, like, I remember what Yavni's saying, which is right, that it is ideally we don't, right? It's a sur de rabbanan to do kiddushin mibia. We don't want to. But second of all, I actually don't think the yichud that happens after a wedding has anything to do with kiddushin. I think it has everything to do with chuppah, right? That's in fact the Ramah will eventually get there. I think. I don't think we've seen that yet. Right? We'll say that we don't really know what chuppah is. It could be the thing that we put over ourselves, the canopy we put over ourselves. Plus, it could be this and that. And he adds, and it could be yichud that they do afterwards. And the edim there are edei nisuin, right? Essentially, right? That's how we do nisuin. Part of the chuppah is that the bride and groom spend time in a room together, and there are edim outside that saw them do that they actually did yichud. And that's not actually meant to be part of kiddushin at all, which is why we can say the brachot beforehand of sheva brachot, which have nothing to do with kiddushin; those have to do with nisuin. So,
right. Well, I think that in other words, the chuppah. In other words, you're saying it's a chumrah on chuppah more than it's a chumrah on kiddushin.
exactly.
True,
yeah.
True.
Yeah.
The only thing is, it's a little bit right, and then we have to have witnesses for chuppah. You're saying. And then what is the time constraint? So, we determine the time is actually determined by the minimum time that you can do bia. So there is something going on there with bia. That's why, as far as the amount of time it's supposed to be in the cheder yichud, it's like whatever, 6 minutes or 9 minutes. It's because of the concept of bia. But you're right. It is essentially a chumrah on chuppah.
Yeah. I wonder if that time thing is a later. I need to look. I wonder if that's a later thing that people could. That originally, if you look at it, no one would.
Maybe we're trying to accomplish two things at once. I don't know.
So, I mean, definitely Isurei Yichud, right? From what I understand them, are much shorter than the time that they, anyone will ever tell you should be in the Yichud room after Nisuin, right? So.
And that's what I've got. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Just as a Yeah, thank you very much. That was very, very nice presentation, Asher. Really good job.
Thank you.
We'll just let me give a one word or one sentence summary, kind of. I think we see like this contradiction that on the one hand, by the Sivlonot, we assume he's not trying to compensate for a bad kiddushin, but by the Bia, we assume he is. And the question was, why is that? And we gave a couple different reasons, maybe because of the fact that he brought Eidim, maybe because it was unusual to do Bia at that time and would not wait. Maybe it's because Sivlonot were normal. So either way you look at it, it comes out that the actions, in other words, we have to interpret the actions of the person afterward. And that tells us what he's thinking about the Kiddushin. In the case of the half a pruta, he's actually in the case of giving Sivlonot, he's doing a normal action. So we don't assume that he had any doubts about what happened earlier. But when he brought witnesses and did Bia, then he seems to indicate to us that he had some doubts about what happened before. And so his actions are now interpreted to be a redoing of that Kiddushin. I think that's accurate. But maybe, whatever. That's my summary. All right, let's take a break here for 5 minutes, and then we'll start Siman Lamed Bet.
Rav Nachum, before you go away, I just this whole just had me thinking. What would be what do you think would be the approach with cryptocurrencies, right? Because I think that's interesting, because like you have some cryptocurrency that are worth pachad mishaveh pruta in real life. However, in a virtual environment, they're worth a lot. So how do we define like pachad mishaveh pruta, and also how do we define like whether it's worth in paras, right? It's like, how does that work? I think that would be like an interesting topic to explore.
Well, it all depends. You see, the cryptocurrency, I would say like this, it all depends on one factor. Here, I'm actually going to give you an answer because you asked. It all depends on whether the cryptocurrency can get out of the virtual world and actually buy something. And now that, like, for example, Tesla, will accept cryptocurrency as money. So that's what makes it money. If it remains solely in the blockchain world, then it's not really money because you can't do anything with it. But once you can actually buy gold with it, or buy, tomato ketchup with it, or a Tesla, then it is money. But then it still has to be worth shaveh pruta. In other words, you should be able to buy with it that amount of silver. So it's very simple.
And she has to have access.
What?
She has to have real access to real control.
If you can buy silver with it,
cryptocurrency, even in giving it over, you never know. That's right. I understand.
But doesn't it?
Okay.
What do you think?
I guess I'm wondering whether the logic of like Shama Shaveh Pruta B'Madai, if you're the Rambam, that seems to depend on actually being able to go there, right? But if you don't go that route, and it's just like some theoretical value that it could have, then I wonder whether it's not so crazy to say that it doesn't matter whether she can go and buy a Tesla. All that matters is like there's some possible nearer world where she could buy a Tesla. And so like, I don't know enough about this, but like whatever is not Bitcoin and it's like the next one.
And they should go live in that world.
No, I think
fine. Maybe you shouldn't. I mean, I don't want to live in that world. Fine, but like that's a different problem.
No, but
I mean, technically you could buy an NFT with it, which has no like real physical value. However, it has a value in like in the like the virtual realm and also out of it. It's like it's considered art, even though it has no physical value in itself. I just think like it's a really interesting concept, and it might be like halachically relevant within the next couple of years.
No, yeah, well, I don't think anyone's gonna. How would you, at the chuppah transfer that Bitcoin to her? I don't know. But I think that the real, I don't know. Sarah, I hear what you're saying, but let me say the other way and say, no, maybe all the Madai means is that if I'm in Israel and they're not selling Teslas in Israel and I can't yet buy it, although they are selling Teslas, but let's say they hadn't yet, but I could use the Bitcoin to buy it in America, then it's got value. That's all that it means. No?
I guess, I mean, it just depends on whether you think that like what's going on with the Shema Shavei Pruta Madai depends on her being able to get to Madai, which is why like I think I said this in like 2 seconds, like 2 weeks ago, that nobody says like it's a real schlep to go to Madai, and like you should have to be compensated for the whole process of like getting herself there, and then like it's only worth that it's only valuable as Shavei Pruta and Madai if I have like the means.
Well, nobody
to
says,
get
even the
myself
Rambam
there.
doesn't say you have to go there. He just says you have to be able to go there. And therefore, with
Right, but
fresh
if I'm not
bananas-
able to go there because I can't afford to, I don't know, hire a
You
donkey.
should no, be able to in the sense.
That should be a problem.
Theoretically, I could go there. It's just that these bananas will get rotten by the time I get there. So they're not actually worth that in Madai, because I couldn't, even though I have no plans to do that and I don't have a boat, but I should be theoretically able to get it there. But I'm not with bananas, but with gold, I am able to get it there. Grain, I'm able to get it there. That's the Rambam's understanding.
Yeah, I just was waiting for someone to say like, well, it's as good as bananas if I have no means of conveying myself to wherever, you know what I mean? Like in terms of what is it, right? If what we're worried, I mean, I think some of this like goes to the question of like, is this actually about her getting some object of financial value that's somehow supposed to compensate her for something? And if that's not what we care about, it's not what we care about. But if it is based on her ability to sell it, she, you know, if she can't afford to, I don't know, hire her boat trip or whatever
She doesn't know
to get
how
to
to
Madai,
use
then she can't get to Madai.
She doesn't know how to use Bitcoin. You gave it to her, but she doesn't have a wallet and she doesn't know how it works.
As opposed to the idea that this was not the Rambam, which is like that is it just a significant transfer, right? And in a world where people think Bitcoin is significant, whether or not you could use it may be irrelevant, right? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, but I say it's even deeper because it may not even be worth anything. You know, all of a sudden China may say it's illegal and America may say it's, in other words, it may not be anything. Just the fact that people say it's something is what makes money money.
Mhm.
It has to be the king. The king has to say it's money. And this is a new revolutionary kind of money where the king is not involved.
So that's always been the case with coins though, right? Right. It's like you could destroy the value of them at any time, right? If the king
No,
gets up
coins is because the king says it's valuable.
Yeah. So
But I'm saying Bitcoin is not like that.
Not only traditionally coins were because there was value to the.
Not exactly,
from
because
the
we
minting.
talked,
The minting was to
about
say
this.
how much weight it was, right?
Yeah, but it's not exact, because if the weight was a little bit off, you would still accept it. Even then, we talked about this. Even if the weight is a little bit off, it's still called a shekel.
Yeah, doesn't the kingdom still back it no matter if it's, you know,
Right, you
whether or
could
not
go, because you could go to the king and exactly, you could go to the kingdom or the treasurer and he'll give you a new one if it's off. So, but the point is there's an accepted authority that's determining that this is valuable. And if Bitcoin, it's communism. It's everybody is agreeing that it's worth something. It's very weird that the money, the monetary value of a currency is fluctuating so greatly, because it's whatever people say it's worth. There's no king. There's no monitor.
Yeah, but that logic also like a stock, right? Like we've seen over
It's
the
like a
past couple
stock.
years that people can decide what the stock value is.
But a stock is actually a percent of a company, which is a thing.
Right, but it could the company
Is the company a thing?
the company could be worth
The
a lot less, and the stock.
The company has a book value. Yeah, the company has a value, and we're evaluating that thing. The Bitcoin, it's not evaluating anything else. It itself is just going up and down.
But we don't have to
So,
know that the thing is going right. We know that you can be
halachically-
mikudeshet on food, and food the value is going to go down because it's going to spoil. So, right.
But food
But it
is a
doesn't need to be-
valuable thing. It's a
Yeah.
thing.
In the
Bitcoin is
moment,
not a
it's a
thing.
thing that has value, but Bitcoin is not a thing. Yeah.
So that's why eventually, halachically, in terms of practice, we try to have something in which two usual nincompoops, even they could say, Shava Pruta. I mean, to have a transaction in such a case, you want something, to have a chumrah that you need to get, fine. Or to have a chumrah that you need Kiddushin Shanim, fine. Then you can play with that. But in actual, what we want to get to is clarity. And Bitcoin lacks the clarity. Hareat Makudeshet Le Be, and then you give 69 numbers out. And that would be quite beautiful, but she might not remember the 69 numbers. And that might not necessarily work. So there's no clarity. Why did a Tabat, besides for its mystical reasons, become? Because it's something that Kol HaOlam could understand. But nonetheless, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov.
All right, let's take a break. Good question,
Great.
Ruben. We'll think about it. Welcome back from the break. So we're now going to go to Siman Lamed Bet, but we're going to do some Gemaras first. So I'm going to share with you my screen. I better have the right screen here. Okay. So I gave you guys this. I gave you this. I shared with you this source, and I edited a bit now recently. Actually, the later Gemara we'll get to just as a relevant thing. Here we're actually talking about getting married with a shtar chov, which is a big debate whether you can get married with a shtar chov, which is kind of similar to what we were talking about there with the, the stocks or bonds. Is that maybe a shtar chov? But anyway, let's start here. This is Kiddushin Tet Amud Aleph. And I lightened the part that I don't actually want to do in class. I lightened it. Somebody want to read? I have everybody read already. Maybe Yavni, you'll read. If you're not muted.
Sure, I'm going to read it off of my page though, so I'm just.
You can read it off of your. You can read it off of your page. I'm not offended.
תנו רבנן, שטר כיצד, כתב לו על הנייר או על החרס, אף על פי שאין בו שווה פרוטה, ביתך מקודשת לי, ביתך מאורסת לי, ביתך לי לאינטו, הרי זו מקודשת. Should I translate?
Yeah.
Doing Kiddushin by shtar, how? He writes on a piece of paper or on ceramic, or inscribes in clay, even if it's not worth a pruta, that thing, your daughter is betrothed to me, your daughter is engaged to me, your daughter is my wife. She's mekudeshet.
And the way I punctuated it, it's three possible things. You don't have to write all that. Obviously.
Right. Sorry, yeah, I didn't.
And it's paired here in the lashon of your daughter, but it could also be you if it's
you.
If it's a gedola. Okay, go on.
מה תקיף לה רבי זרע בר מעמל? לא דמי השטרה לשטר זביני. So Rabbi Zera Bar Mama says, this is not like this shtar is not like a shtar of sale. Hata mocher kotev lo sadai mechura lach. Hacha baal kotev bitech mekudeshet li. There, in case of selling goods, it's the seller who writes the shtar, and here it's the person who's acquiring kivyachol that writes the writes the shtar. Amar Rava hatam mi'inyana dekra v'hacha mi'inyana dekra. That difference is explained based on the psukim that give this. Hatam kativ u'machar mi'achuzato b'mechor tala rachamana. Hacha kativ ki yikach b'bal tala rachamana. There we have a pasuk that says, and one sells from one's property. The pasuk is
about the seller.
Subject of the pasuk is the seller.
Right.
And
when you with land, you sell it. You don't buy it. You sell it.
Right.
So sell it means that the owner writes the the contract.
Right. Whereas there's a pasuk ki yikach, and which the subject of the pasuk is the one marrying, so they're the one who writes the shtar. But aval hatam nami kativ sadot bekesef yiknu, kari be yiknu. But we have another pasuk where it says you buy.
That's wait. You read that a little bit wrong, but read it. Translate.
Hatam nami kativ. There, in the case of selling property, it also says we have another pasuk. Sadot bekesef yiknu,
Which means you buy fields.
Which means
so the buyer should
buyer
write the contract.
Right, the buyer has the subject should write the contract. My tama karit beyiknu. Mishum de
Wait. So kari be no. So the first one is yiknu, and the second one is the answer kari be yaknu. In other words, don't read it. We're answering. We're saying don't read it that fields were bought, but fields were made acquired too. In other words, reverse the meaning of yiknu. In other words, not that they bought fields, but that they were made to acquire fields by the seller.
By the seller. Mishum de kativ. I thought this was all still the kushia.
Well,
maybe
not. Maybe you're right, but
then how do you read? So then how do you read mishum de kativ u'machar?
And then he said, no, wait. So I read it like this: Sadot bekesef yiknu. So you also see that that the buyer is buying the fields. It says no, kari be yaknu. Read it as yaknu. Okay. And then we ask a new question: my time of kari be yaknu. Well, what gives you the right to? What gives you the right to read it that way?
Oh, okay.
What? And then we answer mishum de kativ machar, because we have another word over there that says machar. So that proves that the seller is the one writing and that's what it must mean here. In other words, what's machar? Machar is our pasuk, Vayikra. Umachar b'achuzatov. In other words, we've got a contradiction between two verses, Vayikra and Yirmiyahu.
Yeah.
And we're going to read the Yirmiyahu in a different way because of the Vayikra.
Okay. Although Rash, I'm willing to go along with that. Rashi says mishum de kativ machar betmiha.
Well, because we're still in the middle. We're still in the middle of it's a long, convoluted question.
Okay.
And in other words, what's the reason that you're in it? You're going to tell me because you're going to tell me through like that. You're going to tell me it's because it says makru.
Right.
You're going to tell me that it's a proposed answer. And then we say hachanami. But then we say we can also say. So then I'll give you an upshlag here.
Hachanami karebe ki yikach dichtiv et biti natati liish hazeh.
So I can change yikach to mean something else. Hachanami karibe, I don't know, yukach. It's not yikach, yukach. Not whatever. Or shil, reverse the meaning. And what's my proof to do that? Diktiv et biti natati liish hazeh. I found a pasuk that shows that there's a giving of a woman and not a taking of a woman.
Yeah.
So I can go either way, and as I could do both of them, as I could go. I have ways to prove that that also by marriage should be not taken literally when it says yikach, but it should be yukach. It should be that she's purchased, that she's given.
Right.
So then we've come up with the answer.
Ela amar Rava hilchatan inehu v'asmachin hu Rabbanan akai. Rather, Rava says that this is the halacha, as Rashi explains, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that on one hand you do it, it's the seller who writes and on the other hand it's the marrier who writes.
So this is like an amazing chiddush. That if you didn't read this Gemara and you read a lot of other Gemaras, you would say this is not true. You would say we have a pasuk. The man writes the ketubah. The man does the kiddushin. And writes I could extend it to the Kiddushay Kesef, But right here, it's only talking about Kiddushay Shtar. But let's just exaggerate the point. I'll say, even by Kiddushay Kesef, you might think that the reason it's Kesef is because Yikach, Ki Yikachish, the man is doing it. Says the Gemara, there's no real proof that that's the halacha. The only way we know that a man initiates the wedding, minimally at least by shtar, is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Crazy, right? Isn't that crazy? It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There's the Rashi. No, I didn't bring the Rashi. Okay, but yeah, the Rashi that you mentioned is the correct. Is the Rashi you should notice. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, so now I wanted to skip. So what did we get from this? Let's summarize. What did we get from this? We got from this that you have to write a shtar on something and give it to the woman. The man has to give it to the woman, and we have that as a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And it has to be written on this shtar is, harei at mikudeshet li, or bitech mereset li. But that's okay. That's the basic din. You have to write this. So we need some more gemaras to get some details of the din. And I want to skip this ibois ema because it's really just saying it in a different way. I actually have a shas, part of a shas, translated into English by. I only have the moed. I only don't have the whole thing, but I have moed of the Bavli translated to English by like some Hebrew publishing company in like 1901. And what they did was every ibois ema they just skipped. They just didn't translate it. They said, why? What's the point?
That's amazing.
They also in various places corrected the text. I sometimes would try to find the original, because it's just English with no Hebrew. And it's sometimes hard for me to find because they do not even write what pages it is in the Vilna Shas. There's just a flow of text in English with missing sections. And sometimes they also they intentionally mistranslate. They change the meaning sometimes.
Check to what degree next time, check to what degree they're following the riff.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think they're following the riff because they bring in a gadot. But
on the
you're right.
Ema.
They're definitely not dumb people who did it, because I found one place, I don't remember it at all, I couldn't find, I tried to look for it again, but there was one place where they dafka translated the Gemara incorrectly, but it was a great shot. It was a great way to translate the Gemara. They solved difficulties by just retranslating it. If you don't care, then you can solve a lot of problems. Okay, so I'm skipping the ibois ema in the spirit of that shas, and let's go to Boy Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Because this is an important. This comes up a couple times. This is This is like the shas refers to it as the famous question of Shimon of Reish Lakish.
Okay, do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Boy Rav Shimon ben Lakish, shtar irusin shekatvu shelo lishma ma'u. Rav Shimon ben Lakish asks, what about a shtar irusin that was written not for this particular woman?
Right. So what is exactly not for this particular woman? He wrote, in other words, harei at. He went to a store and he bought a document that said harei at mikudeshet li, and he just went and handed it over to her. So it wasn't written for her; it was written just for an anonymous person.
He used the Hallmark edition.
Exactly. He bought a Hallmark card. Right. Exactly. So now we're getting into this.
To whom it may concern, will you marry me?
So now we have this Havaya Liatzia Hekish, which is a very important Hekish. I think we've seen it before. Havaya Liatzia is in fact how we learn shtar in the first place, right? That's because we know that if you can get divorced, Yitzia, with a shtar, with a get, then obviously you should be able to go in. Kol shekain, you should be able to go in, or a Hekish. You should also be able to go in with the shtar. So Havaya Litzia is the basic way we learn that there is shtar at all. So we know that there's that Hekish. And Reish Lakish is saying, now we're getting into this question of how many of the dinim of Gittin are we going to require in the dinim of Kiddushin with a shtar? Is it everything? Is it some things? What is, so you're asking lishma, for example, is something that you have to have in a get. So actually, to learn the rest of this sigya properly, we have to learn all of, we have to learn a lot of stuff about gittin. So we're going to touch on a little bit, but not enough that you should be able to consider yourselves capable of writing a get. I hope. Okay, so go ahead. Havaya liyitzia makshina.
מה הייתה בעין הנשמע? החוויה בעין הנשמע, what you just said, like with a divorce, we need with getting out of the marriage, you need it to be in her name, like in her name. Also for getting into the marriage, you need it to be her name. או דילמה הוויות להדדי מקשינן, מה הוויה דכסף, לא בעין הנשמע, אף היה ודשטר, לא בעין הנשמע. Or we could do a hekesh from Kiddushei Kesef, like the other version of Kiddushin within
Right.
Kiddushin.
We could compare different types of Kiddushin.
Right.
And since money, what does it mean? Kesef lo ba'inin lishma. What would it mean if we would have kesef lishma?
It didn't need to be minted for the sake of her to get married by it.
Exactly. That's Rashi. Rashi says that.
Yeah, that's Rashi.
You minted it for, in other words, I mean, by the way, how do they know that kesef doesn't need to be minted for her? Maybe it does. Well, we don't have any source that says that it needs to be minted for her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
So if star is the same as kesef, maybe it doesn't need.
right. Should I go on?
Yeah.
Batal debaya hadar pashta. So after Reish Lakish asked this, he came back and answered it. Havaya liyitzia makshinan. Damalka veyatza vayta. We go with the first one. We learn from divorce, and this is the verse from which we get that hekesh. It says, it's talking about like if someone gets divorced, then within the same pasuk, it says then she can go on and marry someone else.
Right. So it's a kind of weird answer because, like, well, he knew this in the beginning. What new information did we get?
He picked one.
He picked kind of like he picked one. He said, well, we have a real hekesh. I would say it like this. We have a real hekesh for Yitzia Vahaisa. And we don't actually have any proof, any pasuk that tells us that kesef is anything to do with shtar. They're two independent laws and they have nothing to do with each other. We don't have any pasuk, but we do have a pasuk for connecting, going out and going in. So therefore, we should have lishma. So put that in our register that we need it to be written harayat mekudeshitli, but it also needs to be written lishma. It can't be a Hallmark card. Okay, so maybe I'll ask Reuven, you want to read the next Itmar? But unmute yourself.
1 second. Where are we at? Sorry.
We're just exactly where he stopped, which is this where it quotes this pasuk in Devarim, Yatza v'Haisa, and then Itmar.
כתבו לשמה ושלא מדעת. רב אבינה אבינה אמרי מקודשת, רב פאפה ורב שריביה אמרי אינה מקודשת.
Translate.
So let's say they wrote shtar lishma v'shel midat. So they wrote it for her, but without her knowledge. So
Right. What does that mean without her knowledge? What does that mean without her knowledge?
So she doesn't know the shtar is written for her. She doesn't know the shtar has been written, basically.
Is it without her knowledge? Without
Her consent.
Well, that it's
But
yeah,
it
knowledge.
doesn't
No, I like the way Reuven said it. She doesn't know. It's not talking about the I'm just trying to make a point. It's not talking about the Masira. It's talking about the Ketiva. The writing of the shtar has to be written. In other words, you can't like, I'm going to marry this girl. I'm going to go and write a shtar for her and bring it to her and then get married to her. She has to know. I got to tell her, tonight I'm going to write a shtar for you. And she, I guess her consent. I'll agree. I'll take consent. She has to agree that that you're doing this. She has to know and agree that you're going to write her a shtar tonight, and then tomorrow you're going to give it to her.
Agree.
But it's
a good question. What does midata mean? Normally, midata means with her consent, actually, but
It's an extra level though of it, right? Because it's as you said, right? It has to be done at the writing. Obviously, when she takes it, she has to accept it, but it has to be done at the time of the writing as well.
Yeah, it has to be on the writing. But even at the time of the writing, what is it? She just has to know, or she has to say, I want you to do it. But let's see. Rashi here says shalomidata. Later on, Rashi says about lomidata. What does that mean? Kodem aktiva lo nimlach ba. Before the writing, he didn't. Nimlach is like
Consult?
confer,
consult with her.
He didn't confer with her. He didn't consult with her. So it's not clear. It has does it mean inform? Does it mean get her consent? Probably means get her consent.
Well, no, the rest of Rashi, right? Ve'achar kach odiya ve'kavlu. So after that, you let her know about it.
No. Hodiya. I think it means he said, now I'm giving you that star. Hodiya just means he says, now I'm giving you that star. Wait a second. Shalomidat. Kodem ktiva lo nimlach ba v'achar kain. What did he do? He only told her about it. He didn't get her consent. He just told her about it. After the next morning, he just said, you know what, I wrote you last night, here it is. And she accepted it. So she didn't know about it the night before. That's called lo midat.
So it's knowledge or whatever. I mean,
you're right. Here he uses the word hodia. Well, whatever. He has to use the word hodia here. He can't confer with her. It's already a done deal. I think, no, let's go with the idea that he has to get her consent. I think that's the best way, even though it's a little bit of a stronger read than just saying her knowledge. Anyway, so let's go back. Itmar katvula lishma v'lo. He didn't get her consent at the time of the writing, and we have a machlokes.
So Rabba and Ravina amre mekudeshet. So Rabba and Ravina said that it's a proper kiddushin. Rav Papa and Rav Sharivya amre ena mekudeshet. And on the other hand, you have Rav Papa and Rav Sharivya that said that she's not mekudeshet.
Okay, so we need to understand why they say their opinions.
So Amar Rav Papa ema ta'amadid hu ve'ema ta'amadid. So what's the reason and what's my reason? Ema ta'amadid.
No. Ema is not what. I think ema is I will say.
Oh, sorry. So I will say their reason and I will say my reason.
Right.
Ema ta'amadid hu. So their reason is tichtiv ve'yatza ve'ha'ita. Ketzet ve'yatza ve'ha'ita. Makish havaya le'yetzia. So basically we juxtapose coming into the marriage to exiting the marriage. Ma'yetzia lishma ve'shomidata. The same way that when you get a shtar girushin has to be lishma and shilomidata. So it has to be like lishma. It doesn't have to have
you don't have to ask if you want to divorce. If a man wants to divorce a woman, he does not have to consult with her first. He has to write it for her, but he can just show up in the morning and say, "Here it is," and she doesn't have to know that he was writing it that night.
Right. So hafavaya nami lishma v'shomidata. So we have the same thing for avaya for shtar kiddushin that has to be lishma, it has to be written for her, but she doesn't have to be consulted.
Right. Now wait a second. How do we know, by the way, that a get doesn't need to be midata?
Because it says v'yatza v'ha'ita. It's like is that where we're learning from? That first.
No. How do we know that the get? Wait, Yavni.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I'm attaching.
It can be Baal Kolcha. It can be unilateral, the whole thing. She doesn't need to agree to.
She doesn't need to agree to anything. Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. It's about.
Also
how do we know?
Right. He writes for her.
Right.
Like
Rashi says. Right. Rashi says a katavla. In other words, it's all on his achrayut. The katavla. The Torah says he should write this thing. So it's just up to him. He has to write it. He doesn't have to get her consent.
Right. Which reinforces the idea that data is about consent rather than about knowledge. Like she doesn't, yeah.
Right. Well,
if we want to keep it consistent across, like keep the meaning of Shalomi Data consistent across Gittin and Kiddushin, it has to be about consent because there's no Havamina that she can be divorced, at least in rabbinic law, she can be divorced against her will, totally.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Torah, right?
The Torah law. Yeah, the Torah law.
No,
I just know like later that becomes more complicated.
No, rabbinic law, she can't be divorced without her consent. That's why you have this heter me'er rabbanim.
Yeah.
No, but that's only not. But that's not like the Rabbanan like at this stage. That's
Yeah, that's like a much later.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
much later.
We're just having a historical debate about the use of the term rabbinic. I meant in
Right.
the Chazal.
right.
But anyway, the point is,
Sorry.
according to the Torah, you don't need the consent of the woman. Okay, but I'm just saying, but I'm pointing out, there's a Rashi. I don't actually have my Gemara in front of me. I'm just reading this page, but I think whoever does have their Gemara, there's a Rashi there, right? That says on
Yeah.
Midata, he says Katavla, right? He quotes that pasuk.
No, he says, like I said, he says, Shalom midata she'arei al korcha היא מתגרשת.
Okay. Okay.
It's the next Rashi after that, I think.
Oh, sorry, that. Oh,
Yeah, this Rashi says, "Koram haktiva lo nimlach ba, v'achar kach hodia v'kibalta."
Dat makne. He says, "Hainu bal shemakne ota beget ze leatzma ufotra mimenu uva'inen shichtov midato dichtiv vechatav la." Right, but that's
Right.
about why he has to
You're
write
right.
it.
So we
Yeah.
didn't actually get to that part of the Gemara, but yes, that's exactly the Rashi I was referring to. That says katavla. He learns from the word katavla that she doesn't have to be involved. But let's continue in the Gemara so we can get to that Rashi. So wait a second. Where are we? We just said that if we compare marriage to divorce, then just like divorce does not require her opinion, her knowledge, or her consent, neither does the writing of the shtar kiddushin need her consent. She obviously has to have consent when you give it to her, but not in the writing of it. Which is a weird idea, just in general. Like, why would we even think that you need to consult with her? The main point is, but then she accepts it. But because we're comparing it to Kiddushin. That's exactly Reish Lakish's, not Reish Lakish, that's exactly the question and the machloket here. If we go that far of comparing it to Gerushin for sure doesn't need. So maybe also by a Kiddushin doesn't need, and why should it? So now we have the other alternative. So it says the aim at time at DD.
ויצא והייתה מקיש הוויה ליציאה, once again, מה יציאה בעינן דעת מקנה, אף הוויה בעינן דעת מקנה. So the same way that, I guess.
So it's also going to be based on a hekish of Yitzia v'haisa, but a different hekish. And look what he's going to do here.
So my Yitzia bainan da'at makne, the same way that Yitzia needs the knowledge of the one that acquires.
Which is who?
not the one that acquires, the opposite. The one
that is acquired. My bad.
No.
No, the one that is acquired.
What is who is the dat makne in the
Yitzia? The woman, I would guess.
The woman is acquiring herself.
Right.
She's acquiring herself when she gets divorced. She's a free woman now. So she acquired herself. So, but my Yitzia.
Wait, no, so it's the opposite. It's
the opposite.
Makne is one who's giving it away. So because he's giving her away,
I said it backwards. Thank you, Yafni. Because it didn't make sense what I was saying, because she doesn't. My Yitzia boinan dat makne. Just like the Yitzia requires the one who's doing the Yitzia, the husband, he is makne her to herself. Right? He is giving her over to herself.
In the first place, I guess, no?
What?
The one that is makne in the first place. So
he's the one makne, at this moment of the divorce, he doesn't own her, but he ki'ilu has acquired her, and now until now through the marriage, and now he's makne her back to herself. He's giving her over to herself, so that she's free, and it requires the dot of the husband. He can't divorce without the husband's consent.
So af havaya bainan da'at makne. Similarly, like when someone comes into a marriage, needs the da'at of the makne.
Who is the makne there?
So I guess in this case it has to be the woman.
The woman is makne herself to the man.
Right. So that's what Rashi says, right? In this case, it's the woman that's kone herself to her husband.
So therefore what? So therefore you need her dot when you write the star. Bo'inen dat makne. We need the husband. In other words, you might have thought, in other words, when you get divorced, the husband, it's not enough that he has a bill of divorce that's written for his wife. At the time of the writing, he has to know about it. You know, if he can't go to, let's say, a guy who says, I hope Shlomo gets divorced from Leah. So he writes, hooray, Leah, you are divorced from me. And he writes it for that Leah. And it's, but Shlomo doesn't know this. And then Shlomo, up and up, decides he does want to divorce his wife. And he goes over to this sofer and he says, he says, oh, I already had it because I knew you were going to get divorced. Here it is for Shlomo to divorce Leah. It's written Lishma, and it's written for her and for you, and get your names on it. Go for it. He's puzzled. It's puzzled because the time of the writing, the get needs to have the dot of the makne. He needs to know what?
How do we know that?
So we're not learning all of I have to apologize. We're not learning all of Hilchos Gittin, but that's what's going on here. That's what this Gemara is saying. I mean, where does the Gemara know it from? You'd have to learn Gittin, but this Gemara already here is saying that you need that. I'm just explaining what the Gemara is saying. You need dat makne at the time of the writing, because that's our whole question. You need the dat makne. Obviously, you need the dot of the person when he's giving it. He can't think that he's giving her, a love letter. He obviously has to know what he's giving her, but he also needs the dot makne at the time of the writing. And so too, we need the dat makne. That means the time of the writing of the shtar kiddushin. The woman needs to know that it's being written for her, because she is makne herself to her husband. She is an active participant in this kind of kiddushin. She is the dat makne, and you're right. And the writer, whoever's writing it, whether it's her or a sofer, is writing it for the purpose of her, with her knowledge and her consent. And otherwise, it's possible. Says this Hekesh. Sarah.
How you can just decline to answer this if it is too far afield, but to what extent is the requirement for dat makna and the requirement that it be lishma basically a version of the same? Like, are they the same thing or sort of overlapping, such that like what it means to have the dat of the makna is to be writing this for the purpose of?
No. I gave you an example. That was my example. I tried to make it clear. The sofer, he wrote it for Shlomo to divorce Leah. So it's lishma. Nobody can deny that it's lishma. But Shlomo didn't know it was being written by that sofer. And he came the next morning and he says, I need you to write one for me to divorce my wife. He says, I was counting on this. I have it already ready for you. Right. So it's lishma, but it's not that. It's not the dot of the makne.
Right. So one is a sort of, it might be that it's necessary to have the dat makne. It has to be lishma, but not the other way around. If the requirements have to be written with the dat,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
No, but does that what if sense? I would have two wives and I decided I'm going to divorce one of them, and I don't care which one, but I have dat makne. I want to write this divorce to divorce wife. It's not lishma. I didn't write it lishma. I don't know which one I'm writing it for.
Or just like right. I mean, I can imagine a simpler case where like the guy goes to the sofer and he just says like, write me a get. I'll fill in the names later.
And the sofer doesn't know.
And the sofer doesn't know, but he knows.
Whom he's writing.
Fine. So, thank you. That
yeah.
The
two different
that clarifies that question.
Yeah. This if I just scroll up in my thing, there's the 3 paragraphs and there's 3 ideas. The first paragraph is that you have to write. What do you have to write on it? You have to write Harei Ad Mikudesh. or Middle West. The second is you need to have, the second paragraph is you need to have it be lishma, for this particular, it has to be personalized. And the third is it has to be an awareness of the parties involved of the writing when it's being written, which is a bit of a, I mean, unless you've studied this, you would never know that such a rule. It would never be obvious to you that this would be a rule, but this is a rule. Well, this is a rule, it's a machloket. This is exactly the machloket. So let's go back. What are the opinions? Rava and Ravina hold that you don't need it. They say mikudeshet. You don't need it. You don't need to go that far. Even by get, you do need it. But by kiddushin, you don't need it. And Rav Papa and Rav Shravya hold, no, we are going to compare it all the way. Kiddushin, Gerushin, they are identical dinim. And if it's Eno, she's Eno Mekudeshet if it's not Midata. And the reasons they gave is by basically how you do this comparison of a Yatza of a Haisa. Well, let's do that again. Let's do that again. Here, Ruvain, do that again. What are the two different ways of explaining Yatza of a Haisa?
All right, so the first one is Makish Havayatzia, Maitzia Lishma Veshlamidata, the same way that Yetzia does not require for the husband to go to her and consult her, does not require consultation. Similarly, for Shtar Kiddushin, he doesn't need consultation.
There's one is we view it as, we don't need the woman's consent in divorce, so we don't need the woman's consent in
I guess it's just for the Shtar
marriage,
itself.
and we're viewing it as by the gender. In other words, and not the role. Right? In the second one, we're viewing it by the role. In marriage, in divorce, you don't need the woman's involvement. So in marriage, you don't need the woman's involvement. The second opinion is saying in divorce, you don't need you need the role of the makne. So in marriage, you should need the role of the makne. It just so happens that the makne switches from male to female in those two cases.
I feel like this juxtaposition is talking specifically about the Shtar itself. The same way that for a Shtar Gerushin, you don't need her consultation, you don't need to consult her. Similarly, for Shtar Kiddushin, you don't need to consult her, right?
Yes,
but the second one is not talking about Shtar necessarily, right? As you were saying, it's talking about the roles.
No, but it's talking about the roles, but of the people involved in the Shtar. In other words, the makne of the shtar, the person in the shtar who is taking on the role of being makne, has to, in Gittin, has to have his dot involved. So too, the person who has the role, who just so happens to be the woman, she has the role of the makne in the shtar kiddushin, so she also has to have her dot involved.
So the first comparison is a very straightforward comparison, right? The same way that in Shtar number 1, you don't need her dot, you don't need to consult her. Same thing in the second Shtar. It's like a blanket rule for all Shtarim related to marriage, right?
No, but it's her. The key point is in the first one we're viewing it as the woman. It's like a SAT question. How do you make the comparison? We're making the comparison now by woman to woman. In the second one, we're doing it.
Right.
Give her over of object to the giver over of object. And in the divorce, the giver over of object is the man, and in the marriage, the giver over of object is the woman. But in either case, the giver over of the object has to be the one who has the dot involved. Just like what aspect of those two people you're viewing, their gender or their role. Yes, Sarah.
I'm not sure it's strictly gender, because it seems like if she's a katana, then it goes to her then it's about her father's consent or non-consent, right? So then maybe that is still about gender, but it's like a little differently about gender because
he's just I would still.
He's a sort of proxy for her.
Exactly, it's a proxy for her.
But that makes it seem like there is something about like the role in the. There's still a role that can be inhabited by a man or a woman.
You could still call it the wife role versus the makne role. Right. You're right. You could view it as roles and not gender. I was just trying to I was just trying to use modern terms.
Well,
But
and then
Right.
married.
I
with
mean,
a
I think
will
one
and a
way to
top.
think about it is like, either you think about it as a kinyan, and there are two parties in a kinyan. There's like the kona and the mak. Like there's a buyer and a
Mhm.
seller, or you think about it as in marriages, or at least whatever, in these sorts of marriages.
You're right. You're right. I think that's a
There's
very
like
nice
one.
point.
There's two kinds of parties. There's a chatan and a kala.
Right.
For want of a better way
Do
of
we
talking about it.
compare this to a normal contract where we have makne? That was actually a similar issue that we were talking about before. The first Gemara that we saw was about, do we compare it to land? In other words, why is this so different? Normally, when you buy an apartment, the seller writes the contract, and yet here the buyer is writing the contract. So we have this tension, and I've seen it actually in several Gemaras and several things we've learned. Whether we're viewing kiddushin as a monetary transaction like other monetary transactions, or is it a foreign animal, a new thing that just has its own, that has its different rules.
Read on from your computer.
There's no light on my computer.
Joel, your child has unmuted you.
Apologize.
Okay, so let's continue. Where were we? So we said ma yitzia bo'inan dat makne af havaya bo'inan dat makne, and we're here mesve.
Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, read just to the end here.
All right. So this is kind of complicated because there's a Mishnah that said that we don't write shtari rusin or nisuin, but only with the dat of both.
Oh, so at least this is a little bit of problematic, because this on one hand, this seems to contradict everybody, because nobody said you need the dat of both. We just said, do you need the dat of the woman, or you need the dat, or you don't need the dat of the woman?
Well, you for sure need the dat of the man, right? Without his dat, the conversation is not even started.
Fine. Okay, yeah, okay.
I don't know that I would say necessarily that for writing of the shtal kiddushin you need the dat of the man. Maybe that's something that someone else prepared, and or she had prepared and she was like, I'm ready for you.
Right, we don't have exactly. You could say that. You could say she's got it prepared, and she came to the chuppah, and he's got the ring and he's ready. And he says, I'm just worried maybe it's not a pruta. Would you take this paper and marry me with it also? So he says,
no, we're talking about a case where she's mikudeshet al yed shtar. Like the shtar is how she's mikudeshet.
Exactly.
So
she gets to the wedding, and she says, "Don't." I'm saying at the wedding day, she surprises him and says, "Keep the ring. I don't want the ring. I want you to marry me with shtar. Here it is. It's written, like Yavi said, it's written lishma, but the husband has no idea that it was written. But when he does give it, he gives it with his own free will. So it's definitely the Masira is with his dat. But the writing of it was not with his dot. Maybe you don't need that. Says
right,
up
but
till now.
That says that you actually value the value of the paper. It has to come from him to her. Sorry, I'm mixing.
Yeah, that's a different thing. That's a different
totally
point.
different. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up a little bit.
But the point is, it's a thing to observe here that this one says you need dat shnehem, and up to now we were saying just that the woman needed to have her dot involved. The man's dot was not required. Why should it be required? But anyway, dat shnehem seems to certainly say that you answer our question. At least the woman needs to have it. That's for sure.
Right. So it's a contradiction on Rava and Ravina,
really. Yes, it's more of a kasha. I would say like that. It's more of a kasha on Rava and Ravina, or particularly it's kasha on them. Rav Papa and Rav Shravia could say, we don't have a problem with it. We also want the husband to know. But anyway, so go. My love. So continue reading.
My love shtari usim v'nisuim mamash. We're really talking about shtari usim v'nisuim, like the actual shtari usim v'nisuim. So the Gemara answer lo shtari psikta. So we're not talking about like shtari usim v'nisuim, but we're talking about a shtar that highlights how, like the obligation of the husband towards his wife.
Yeah. So look at Rashi. Shtari psikta. Hatanaim shebeineihem umamon sheposkin zelazeh. It's a totally different thing. The fathers get together, or the mothers get together, and they agree. I'm going to pay half of the apartment. You're going to pay half of the apartment. I'm going to buy this. You're going to buy that. And they drink a l'chaim, and they agree. And on that, if you're going to write a star, if you're going to write it down on paper, boinan dat shnehen. And by the way, what's the shnehen there? The parent, both people who did it tonight. Okay. So it's in other words, not talking. You can't bring this brisa, this meisvei as a proof of anything because it's talking about something completely different. It's talking about the Tanaim, nothing to do with Nisui.
וכדרב גידל אמריו, it's similar to the case of רב גידל אמריו, דאמר רב גידל אמריו, כמה אתה נותן לבנך, כך וכך, לביתך כך וכך.
ועמדו, וקידשו, קנו. הן הדברים הנקנים באמירה. So they agreed on the money going back and forth, and then they got up and they did the kiddushin. And then what does kanu mean?
They acquire it, I guess.
What did they acquire?
The contract.
Yeah, the Tanaim now. Now that they did the kiddushin, they each one have to pay the half apartment and whatever else they agreed. In other words, now that obligation sort of is dragged along with the kiddushin, and now they actually have to pay those monies. And then Rav Gittel goes on and says, "Hen devarim ha'nikneim ba'amira." These are the things that are acquired merely by speaking and not by writing anything down. Look at Rashi ba'amira. Everyone has the Rashi?
I got it right here. Belo kinyan shekidushim הם גמר הדבר.
The kiddushin causes the final chalus, the final occurrence of the requirement to actually pay.
Right, so the contract only becomes a valid contract once there is kiddushin, right?
Right.
שהקידושים הם גמר הדבר, דבהאי הנאה דקמיכת הנהדדה, גמר ומקנה. It's only through the hana that takes place through the.
Each one enjoyed. I'm happy you married me. You're happy I married you. And so with that hana'ah, it's kind of like a kinyan suder. Like with that hana'ah I got, so now I'm obligated. It's not a kinyan, what's the other one? Not a kinyan suder, but a kinyan chalifin. I have to now give you all those things that I agreed.
ובאותה תנאים כאמר שהעדים אין ראויים לכתוב עליהם שטר אלא מדעתם. It's only on this specific type of contract that we say that the adim can write the contract without their knowledge or without their consultation.
Why? Now you're going to say why.
דניחא להו שתהיה כמלווה על פה ולא כמלווה בשטר.
So because it's preferable to them that it's an obligation that's an oral obligation rather than a written. Now, they don't like these things to be written down. They'd rather be oral. Why? What's the difference? Is there a nafkamina? So there is a nafkamina in halacha. Anyone know the nafkamina in halacha? The nafkamina in, Yavni?
No, go ahead. I'm trying to remember. It's about like whether you're mishuabad to the something to the
right.
How obligated you are and something like whether you can be.
Whether you're gove min ha-karka or min ha-metaltalin.
Oh.
It's if it's bal peh and the guy says, but I'm sorry, I just lost all my money on the stock market. I don't have money. Then you can't take his house from him to make him pay. But if it was written down as a contract, then a contract's a contract. He has to sell his house. So you can't, the adim can't just say, oh, we're going to write down these Tanaim on paper because it's just, we don't want to forget that, what the Tanaim were. So they can't do it without their dot. So that's all that needs the dot. And then how are we left? We're left with machloket. How's the halacha? We don't know. We have what is meisvei, and we're left with machloket between Rav Papa and Rav Shravya and Rav and Ravina. The normal opinion would be to say Ravina is the later opinion. I believe he's the latest of all these Amoraim, and therefore he would be the halacha, and that would be mikudeshet, which you don't need it. But we're going to look next time. I see the time is up. At the Rif, and I want to see how the Rif. I sent you that sheet. See how the Rif paskins. And then then we'll go on. But I just want to see how the Rif paskins. Then we'll go on to the tour Shulchan Aruch. Whether you need this dot of the husband. Oh, sorry, dot of the wife in the writing of the shtar. So we learned a couple things about shtar. We learned that you have to write Harayat Mikudeshitli or something like that. And we learned that that's how that the fact that it goes from the man to the woman and not the reverse, which is the way it would be in a normal sale of an apartment or land, where normally the seller would give the document, which in this case is the woman. Here it goes in reverse order, and that's just halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which is amazing, I think. And then we have this other halacha that it has to be written lishma, and this other question of whether or not it has to be written with the knowledge of the woman. And we'll talk about that next time. Okay, thank you guys.
Shukach, thank you.
Shkoyach.
Thank you, Shkoch. Lana Tov, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.